restrictions, nothing about profanity, just
Sure.
let loose.
Fuck you! All good. If you're 40 years old and you're serious about your health, then you have to get your levels, your testosterone levels checked.
You're scientifically grounded, you're very evidence-based. And then you've got this other side to you, which is about the
woo-woo
level of your consciousness. And thing is, I'm all about the woo-woo, but I'm very keen to hear how that's come about. So here we are with Jay Campbell. Finally, I am very excited to speak to this gentleman because after my estrogen experiment, which a lot of you responded to and had some really good feedback for, this was where I, having read Anthony Jay and his book Estrogen, and talking about the kind of assault that we're faced with, lots of artificial and exogenous estrogens in our environment, I thought, I'm going to spend 12 weeks testing my blood work before and after and eliminate as many sources of artificial estrogen as I can and see what happens. And I've got the full article on there, so you can look on the link in the description. But the main problem I faced was that every single substitute had some kind of problem. Like, even if you look for paraben-free stuff, it's filled with phthalates and parfum. And if you look for alternative sources of cosmetics, they'd be full of soy or flax, and all the kind of estrogen-free ones supposedly were flavored with lavender or grapefruit, and all of the BPA-free plastics were BPC. It felt as though the world was playing this big kind of prank in trying to you just can't avoid it. And so speaking to Anthony Jay, we got a lot of good background on the kind of epidemiological side of it and the mechanisms. And he recommended that we get in touch with Jay, who is an author of multiple books that he's kindly sent me and a hormone optimization expert. And he has really gone deep with this. Now, before we had this chat, Jay advised me to put on my tinfoil hat for this chat. And so I've got my tinfoil hat ready. Jay, thanks for coming on.
Hey, brother, it's awesome to be here. I truly appreciate, as always, whenever I get a chance to communicate and connect with like-minded people, it's an honor. So thank you for having me on your show. You can go any direction you want. And I actually have my tinfoil hat hanging behind my door over there in my studio. So if you want me to get it, I will.
EMFs, very important to...
You can see it over here. You can't see my mirror, but I have a warning 5G radiation. And I've got, where's my other one? Warning fluoride in the water right here. It's perfectly apropos for this conversation today.
So where do we begin? This is the main issue that I wanted to, the questions that I found coming as a fucking fire engine outside my, always happens when you just start a podcast and they decide to have a fire next door. Anyway, so the main question that I found coming away from the chat with Anthony Jay was, first of all, what are the kind of practical components? What are the practical things that we can do? And also, what are the high yield things that we can eliminate? Because the problem that I faced when looking into the literature was you get a list of compounds and they have different levels of activation to the estrogen receptor, and you're thinking, I don't know what the concentration in each of these things are, and am I pissing in the wind by trying to eliminate my cosmetics when I'm inhaling stuff out in, I don't know what the relative contributions of these things are. And your books bridge the gap with this because they talk about stuff that's really applicable, also talk about the kind of the stuff that is actually hard and people don't want to hear, which is get lean, train frequently, like the stuff that is boring but needs to be done first.
Yeah, to answer the question, I get this question a lot on podcasts, and most people think, because of my books and because I'm like one of the world's leading hormone optimization experts, they think that I immediately go to talking about testosterone must happen. But I'm not that guy. I'm actually naturally, I want you to take every potential avenue and adjuvant that would be natural before you use what I always deem as the biggest tool in the tool belt, which is the therapeutic testosterone. But very truthfully, in answer to your question, and you've obviously done your research, you talked to Anthony Jay, who's a good friend of mine. Him and I have done numerous podcasts and webinars together. It's getting to a point where if you live in a large coastal population center or an urban area, bro, there's almost no way to avoid it. So everything that you just said, you can do all these things naturally. Obviously block out the blue light, filter, turn off your routers, get rid of the 5G and all the electromagnetic interference. And then obviously, as you talked about, put a charcoal filter in your water. Personally, bro, like I don't even this is the only water I drink on the entire planet, right? Like one of the biggest water nerds in the whole world is a good friend of mine and owns a company, which she doesn't like me talking about her on, so I don't ever tell who she is, but they've studied every single water, literally every water that's available on the planet, like every aquifer, every underground spring, everybody that's bottled. And this is the last water. Now, of course, it's in plastic, right? But it's the last water. This is the last water on the planet that's not contaminated. And I tell people this all the time. And this is the only water that I drink. And when you drink Icelandic water for 6 months and then you go and you drink other water, you're like, oh my God, that's how bad it tastes. Because again, it's contaminated. For years, my wife and I, because of our kids and stuff, we would just get giant industrial supplies of Costco bottled water because it's cheap and you can have it, whatever. And I stopped drinking it 2 years ago. And again, this water is expensive, but it's like everything else in life. You get what you pay for. But this water is, like I said, totally uncontaminated, minus the plastic. But it tastes totally different than it does regular water. So my point is that it's very difficult right now. In the year 2020, as of August 10th, if you live in the UK or USA or any major first world, country where you're not being completely bombarded at every angle. And again, I have a doctor, Dr. Rob Komenarik. I always mention him. Great doctor. He's in Ohio at Renew Health. And he's been prescribing hormones for 24 years. And he's also like me. He's very go down the optimized natural path first. But he has it's in my book, obviously, in the TOT Bible, which is actually getting old now, 2018. In 6 months now with data sets the way they are, it's like old. But he says flat out that if you are the most anally retentive person in the world, we also do them by age quadrants. If you're the most anally retentive person in the whole world, if you're over the age of 50, the chances that you can remain optimized, both hormonally, physically, and everything without therapeutic testosterone is less than 2%. Okay. Between 30 and 50, he says it's about 10 to 12%. And this is where it gets staggeringly scary. Under the age of 30, less than 20%. So we already have
it rises between 30 and 50.
Again, because young people today are so uneducated to this, right? They have been brainwashed in ways, again, due to technology, that they have no idea. The average 20-year-old man today, and again, first world Western societies, had a mom who used birth control, had a father that was bombarded by all these crappy packaged foods and all these things. And so their endocrine systems are not as, robust as, say, my endocrine systems or my father before me or his father before him. I always tell people and we don't really have a lot of tests to go by this. The Russians do, but we don't. But if you go back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and you look at men and you looked at their total and free testosterone levels there compared to now, I'm not joking, they're 300% higher.
So here, you're making a claim that there is like an epigenetic transfer of like poor endocrine system from parents to child.
It's 100%. There's a study in my book. It's called the Hebrew University study. You can fact check me on this. And they did literally all 7 continents, 30,000 patient population cohort, and looked at semen and semen volume and motility. And then of course, testosterone or free testosterone levels. And they have already predicted that by the year 2000, somewhere between 2035 and 2040, that's it. From XY chromosome, men will go extinct. They will not be fertile anymore.
So this is a great place to start because it does make you just want to despair. Even there, so step 1, you said this is the water that I drink. They've tested all these different types and there's so much contamination, which I can believe. And if someone's already 10 minutes into this podcast thinking, bloody hell,
and look at that, I'm drinking out of this and it's contaminated. It's Costco.
Well, there we go.
Costco protein, but I got to get my protein, bro.
So this is it. Like there is such a besiegement of different things that like even the water that you get, it's in a plastic bottle. The water filters are often plastic. And what you're pointing to there is that there's this epidemic basically. There's a epidemiological change, there's a big shift, not only in sperm count, serum testosterone, levels of gynaecomastia across the population, obesity, all these kind of things, but it's like it's happening at such a wave that we are now at the point where you have to really make such a dedicated effort to get outside of that. And
you have to live a fully optimized life.
To live a fully optimized life. And if you're living in a normal city, working a normal job where you're exposed to all these kind of extra things, it's what do you do? Not everyone can be Ben Greenfield living off grid in a wooden hut and like with Ethernet.
So yes, it's a good point. And I don't live like Ben Greenfield. I literally live in a nice house in a suburb in LA, and I'm like a step below in the, what's the word I want to use? Like in my ability to avoid, because obviously Ben's a good friend of mine, but you know, that he has his router turned off. It's all hardwired. It's all hard, old school wired. So all of his electricity and his technology are literally turned off at night. So he just zaps all the EMF frequency. Now, again, he lives in the wilderness. So if I had that same situation in my suburban home and where I live in West Covina, California, it wouldn't matter because I am literally still saturated with EMF from the wires, from the 5G in downtown LA that's already radiating the city. It's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. To your point, we can sit and, like you said, in despair, or we can live a very proactive lifestyle. And that's where I go now, where I just tell people like, look, if you're 40 years old and you're serious about your health, then you have to get your levels, your testosterone levels checked. You have to understand if you're functioning with the deficiency, because if you are functioning with the deficiency, and it's a very high probability that you are, you're going to break down really fast from a health and fitness standpoint. So that's step number one. You know, then step number two, and this is where it really becomes difficult, especially for guys like you overseas, is you got to find a practitioner who knows what they're doing when they prescribe a hormone optimization protocol. And through me, if you work with me or follow me in any capacity, I'll probably point you in the right direction. And there are people that I do know internationally, but it's getting harder for the average person, again, based on what I first said at the very beginning, to remain hormonally optimized and really ultimately physically optimized unless you're really proactive.
This is it. You've got to go to such lengths. And yeah, you mentioned that in the UK, for example, we had a chat with a guy who was on testosterone replacement therapy in the UK. And I can certainly speak as a doctor that and you mentioned this in your book, that you are really stuck between a rock and a hard place in that your registration is on the line if you start putting your head above the parapet.
Right.
And because of the social taboo around testosterone, my flatmate, just before we came on, I was like, do you have any questions for Jay? He was like, maybe we should rename it to Estrogen, and that might at least equalize the thing. But this thing with the perception of it and the fact that it's not routinely done by doctors means that you then have to be the guy that sticks out. You have to be the black sheep if you're going to prescribe it. And so no one's willing to take that risk. And so whether they are or not in recognition of some of the potential benefits, it's too risky a move to take. And so they generally tend to just step away from it. It's not worth your registration.
See, it really depends on that. That's ultimately true if you're in insurance-based subrogated medicine, right? Like in the United States, all of the doctors that prescribe hormones, whether they're functional medicine doctors, holistic practitioners, chiropractors, like all the people that don't fall into what I label as sick care, there, it's not a problem because that's their entire practice, but there's no insurance. It's all cash-based business. So that's why it's like a lot harder in, again, the parts of the world where it's all like universal insurance or healthcare or socialized medicine, because no, those people have no clue. Honestly, dude, I can put my tinfoil hat on right now and just straight up tell you that socialized medicine, sick care, whether it's in the US, Canada, UK, Israel, wherever, is abject quackery. You literally are getting medical school designed curriculums that were built in the 40s and 50s that aren't even relevant to today, based on the data sets and the information that we now have. Again, talk to guys like Anthony Jay. He'll tell you that the fish in all of the streams in the West, within 1 year, doesn't matter whether they're freshwater or whatever, are become feminized. The male fish become female fish. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this is happening to the entire genome. All biological life is having these sort of effects. So it's weird, but again, it's harder for you guys where you're at, not as hard here, still somewhat hard, but you have to find a physician that is really practicing outside of the bounds, standardized healthcare.
So what happens then because there are data to suggest that fish are having morphological abnormalities, that there's changes in all of these things that we mentioned before, but also the normal reference ranges for a normal sperm count have been gradually eroded every year, because now very few people, or practically nobody, would have the normal sperm count if we were using the reference ranges from, say, 1980. And so what's happened instead is that the goalposts are being moved in the reference ranges and in the way
Right.
that people see this, rather than anyone doing anything about it. Maybe because of a kind of learned helplessness, or just being like, oh, this is what we've got to face. My question for you is, do you think that there will reach a point where governments or regulatory agencies start to say, okay, we can't ignore this issue anymore, there is too much happening?
No,
Or do you think
no.
they will just continue to move the goalposts?
No, they're already moving the goalposts. To your question, the goalposts are being moved with the mask bullshit. It doesn't really matter at this point. Like, you either say, fuck the mask, I'll take my chances with my own immunity and taking care of myself and living a low inflammation lifestyle. Because again, everything is inflammation based. You know, there's stats already out there now with the virus. 90% of people that are died are inflamed or comorbid. It's just stupid. I said that 6 months ago. I was writing articles about the disease, the bioweapon, the virus, whatever you want to call it, back in February. But like, the reality is that now it's government, big data, big tech, whatever you want to look at them, are all trying to, like you said the right word, morphologically subset people in the way it is. And so it's basically going to be a total bifurcation. Okay. You're going to have people like me who are going to basically say, I opt out of the system. I will pay cash for specialists and people that know what they're doing, versus the people that are scarcity mindset, in my opinion, who just like, oh no, I can only afford my $20, $40 copay, and that's all I got. And you know, they will go down the path of getting drugs until their 60s or 70s, eventually taking so many pills that something gives out, or the side effects from one pill caught up with the other side effect from the other pill, and then they die. And you know, people don't talk about this because it's a very hidden fact, but a lot of people who, again, are addicted or attached, however you want to phrase it, to that sick care medical system, they die bankrupt, because sick care medicine takes all their money. A lot of these people, especially like in California where I'm at, like, you get to 65 and you go on Medi-Cal, and Medi-Cal pays your health insurance. And if you look at all the people that are on health insurance for Medi-Cal, bro, it's just pill after pill after pill. And then they get to 72 or 73, their liver falls out, their kidneys stop functioning, whatever it is. We got this experimental drug that we can give you that'll give you another 2 to 3 years left, but it's going to cost you. And so then all of a sudden you fall.
Well, this is the difference in the incentives and the agendas between universal healthcare and US style healthcare. And it seems like in one you get problems of abundance, and one you get problems of scarcity.
Yeah, they're both useless. They're ultimately, like, I know all the people in Canada that have universal, and they're all like, it's worthless, because if we need a specialist for something, we have to go to America. And then there's a wait, or because again, there's a 12-month, 15-month, to 2-year wait. A lot of people die waiting to see the specialist. So they're all worthless to me. And again, obviously I work with a lot of amazing doctors, but unless I get shot and I'm bleeding out, I am going to a doctor. I'm going to diagnose myself. I'm going to live a low inflammation lifestyle, a fully optimized lifestyle. I'm going to use whatever I can, essentially, therapeutic testosterone, peptides, metformin, thyroid. I'm going to do things to modulate my body. So as you said, to be functionally strong, lean, and avoiding inflammation. Because again, inflammation is what leads to death. Ultimately, cellular degradation over time is what causes, inflammation. The diseases of aging. Whatever it is, that's ultimately where it comes from. So if you avoid all those things, there's very little that you need to go to allopathic medicine for. Again, with the assumption of getting shot or being in a horrible tragic accident, or your leg gets dislocated or something like that, you don't really need any of those things. But again, people are so brainwashed that they think that at the first sign of a sniffle, or they got a pain in their leg, that they have to go to the doctor. And that's just the way culture is. That's global, though.
Yeah, this assumes that you're somebody who is high agency and taking ownership over your health, and has access to the information, and is not, the risk there is that this bifurcation ends up with people profiteering off both sides of that, and you end up with these kind of survivalist holding an AK, like tinfoil hat, like trying to denying.
I need an AK. I don't have one of those yet, but I need one. No, but I understand. There's always going to be people profiteering off both sides, and obviously, you can't even be a cash pay person unless you're modestly successful.
So this was something we were talking about just before we started recording, wasn't it? About the fact that since COVID hit, there's suddenly a big void of fear that people are jumping in. The entire fitness industry is selling immune boosting formulas and hacks and stuff, and you're like,
not me, thank God. But yeah, no, I got you. No, totally. I get it. Yeah, no, I get it. And listen, it's funny, COVID, whether it's something that morphs out of COVID, but this is the world that we're going to be in now for a while until there is herd immunity developed, because there's no vaccine. First off, I don't want to go, down the rabbit hole with vaccines and stuff like that. I'm about to do a podcast with one of the world's leading doctors on vaccines pretty soon, but immunity is inborn, right? There's an amazing book that was written in the 90s. It's called, I recommend you read it. You can probably get it on Amazon for really cheap. It's called The Sanctity of Human Blood. And it was, I think, like a consortium of all the world's top pathologists. They got together. They were so frustrated at Big Pharma and the scam that vaccinations had become that they wrote this book. And I was just a guy on the path of being a hustling, hard charging sales guy in my early 20s. And my chiropractor said, dude, you need to read this book. And again, there's no coincidence in life. And I read that book and I was like, holy shit. And that really took me down the path of alternative health and got me, to where I am now, I think. But immunity is inborn. You don't need any of that shit. Putting it into your body, there are people that will debate me on this and stuff like that, but your body is perfect at birth. It's man, it's us, it's what we do to ourselves that causes disease. Any kind of inflammation is, again, life. It's, what we do, what we're exposed to, all these other things. And as you said at the very beginning of the show, outside of the show, we are now being exposed, whether it's direct or indirect or both, in so many ways. It's like, how do you avoid it without creating a bubble, a hermetically sealed bubble, which people have even done that, and trying to live your life. So obviously the only thing you can do is, again, I go back to this or default to this, and whether you're poor or you're not poor, you can do whatever you can with the means that you have at your disposal to somewhat optimize your existence. Again, that's my viewpoint.
So I think we can absolutely agree on that for sure, that there is very little outside of ourselves that we have control over. And luckily, it doesn't really need taking metformin or ACE inhibitors, and I'm talking from a kind of health optimization point of view rather than to treat an illness, right. Those kind of things. And as you said, they are more kind of the icing on the cake if you want to go down the biohacking route. But there are certainly things that you can do to at least improve your odds. And I like that you've got that at the core of your message, and then the stuff outside of that is to take it to the next level. But I suppose the main thing that I'm fascinated by is, yes, we can do that to an extent, but it's not an even playing field because we are up against this barrage that we talked about. And you mentioned a few of them there, and I cover them in the article as well, but can you talk us through some of the main ones? So we've got like plastics, for example, water.
Yeah, endocrine disrupting chemicals are everywhere. They're in everything. They're in your phone, for example, like my iPhone, right? Like I have one of these military grade spec cases on it, but these polymers in this shit, when it touches your cuticle, it's bad. Ultimately, like we've already said, what can you really do to remove them from your life? Live in a hermetically sealed bubble? It's impossible, bro. I'm being very honest with you. It's not possible. If you are, like I said, extremely proactive, you should absolutely have a filter in your water, in your drinking water, in your shower. The shit that comes out in Los Angeles, like in modern day Los Angeles, through the pipes, and the filters process and stuff that they have now is so disgusting. If you were, to put a filter in there and clean it out like every 45 days of your showers, you would see, God. So it's like, yeah, go ahead.
So let's say with a water filter, should we be, the question that I was so unclear on at the end of the podcast with Dr. J is that, let's say we've got $500 to spend on things to eliminate. Now, having a water filter for your shower versus a water filter to drink, like presumably the drinking water is going to have much more of an endocrine disrupting effect than the water that's touching your skin. But
no, that's completely not true.
Okay, so should we
that's
be
what I'm saying to you is that, okay, so all I can tell you is what I do. I'm almost 50. And I just had my biological age, got back from True Diagnostic, which is like the revolutionary company. And my biological age is almost 20 years old. So I'm almost 50. So I'm doing, obviously, according to that calculation and algorithm, I'm doing a lot of things. For me, it's, again, maintaining leanness. That's the number one thing any person can do on the planet. You can worry about putting a filter in, obviously, or a drinking water filter. You can do all those things. You can remove all the things like in your article, avoid plastic, avoid parabens, avoid phthalates, BPA, all those different things. But to me, if you really want to maximize your embodiment, your physical body in this age of whatever is going on right now, just be lean. That's the number one thing you can do. People say, what does that mean? And I'm like, if you're 25% body fat and you're a dude, you're going to die at least 10 to 15 years younger than I am. That's a statistical fact. And you're also not going to be as living an amazing life as me, because I can ambulate whatever. I'm functionally strong. I can bend over. I can pick up my kids. I can walk my dog, who's a very strong pit bull. If you're lean, you're going to live more optimized and be more immune/resistant to disease. And again, whatever comes your way. So, that to me, the lower your body fat, the less inflammation you have.
There's so many arguments to being lean, let alone the...
Right. Body fat is the most inflammatory substance we know of. Visceral body fat is actually more inflammatory than kerosene. That's how crazy it is. Like, they've done burn tests with visceral body fat, right? So it's like when you have visceral body fat, which again is for guys, center mass. When women, it's like, a lot of fat in their hips, they get that pear-shaped or whatever. You're just asking for disease. And a lot of guys, I talk about this all the time, sexual dysfunction is huge today, right? And when you have gut fat, your gut fat is causing massive amount of inflammasomes, which are basically creating cytokine storms, which those cytokine storms are annihilating your penis, your reproductive machinery, the flow of your endocrine system, obviously your semen motility. So the higher the body fat, the higher the propensity of obesity. Obviously, the higher there is metabolic dysfunction. There's much more insulin resistance. So those things alone, if you just lower your body fat, and guys always ask me, like, what should I get to, bro? I think personally, you should be around 12 to 15% year round. I'm much leaner than that, but I don't go really much higher than probably 9 or 10% year round. But then again, I'm also fully optimized and have been living this way for 20 years with the things that I do. But if you just remain lean, like again, relatively lean, 12 to 15% body fat, I think that's the best adjuvant to the war on our endocrine, the environmental war that's being played on our endocrine systems, rather than all the things that you did. Because if you do all the things that you did, you will see a noticeable improvement. But it's absolutely still massive amount of work, a lot of focus. If you're a driving entrepreneur, there's no fucking way that you can do all those things and like consistently do that for your whole life. You go nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's looking at what are the lowest hanging fruit, really. And as you said, that Anthony J said something similar where he's like, okay, I've seen the before and after photos, but actually because you have a decent level of muscle mass, that is providing enough of a buffer to not be too affected by the stuff. So it's quite good to know that actually by starting with a good body composition and maintaining that, you're protected somewhat against this other stuff.
So to that, hold on, to that point, because it's a great point, and a lot of people miss that. Because I always say, right, muscle fiber, mass, skeletal tissue is the greatest deterrent to the diseases of aging. And it's true because muscle is so metabolically active and you become so biologically resistant, right? You have better bone mass, mineral density. You have obviously better elasticity. You have better synovial fluid content in your joints, which allow you to have better spacing and viscosity, and obviously, of course, cushioning for when you're doing any kind of training or moving or hiking or any of that stuff. So if you do that, which really is the same thing as getting lean, right? Because obviously the leaner you are, the more muscle you have. And that's where people get confused. When I say get lean, they don't realize that a lean person is muscular, because it's not like they're going to be just bone and lean. They're going to have muscle. So by leaning out, you're going to add more muscle. So it's very important, because a lot of people, I think, when you say you just got to add muscle, they instantly go to their mind of, I'm going to be bulky like a bodybuilder. Women think that. So it's
it
like,
always cracks me up when people say that. Because it's like, oh, do you go to the library? I might get too clever. Or you go out for a jog and you think, oh, I might win the 100-meter gold medal, so I should probably take it easy. Like, people think that it's that easy to gain muscle.
It's crazy, dude. But that's why I don't say it. That's why I say get lean. But I'm glad you said that, because that's why I want to quantify it, because obviously when you lean out, you get muscular. It's that simple. You can't lean out if you're not actually building muscle tissue to increase thermogenesis and basal metabolic rate and all these different biochemical cascades. It just can't happen.
So it's good to know that, like, once you get a footing on that, you can maintain it a little bit easier. Because I think that the main reason that I even started looking into all this stuff was because I'm interested in maintaining a good body composition, and I started to see that a lot of the estrogenic compounds that we're exposed to contrary to that. They worsen our body composition. And I thought, how can I limit that? But then it seems that actually by being in good shape in the first place, you can mitigate it. Whereas on the other hand, you do get people that major in the minors and they might be 25-30% body fat and they're taking like ZMA to try and optimize their testosterone. And you're like, maybe get lean first and then you can worry about the zinc and the magnesium.
Right. No, exactly. You're preaching to the choir, singing my tune, because I say that all the time. You're not going to see anything. It's the same thing with peptides, right? Guys are like, oh, I want to look like you, bro. I'm going to use testosterone. I'm like, what's your body fat? Oh, I don't know. I'm like, do you have a belly? And they're like, yeah, I can still see my dick. Honestly, like, people are so clueless about these type of things, but it's so important that you create that basis. And that's why I always tell people, and I don't do a lot of coaching because I don't trade time for money, but ultimately at the end of the day, if you don't have an understanding of where you are and then where your goal or where you intend to go, it's nothing that you do, no adjuvant that you take or use, regardless of what it is going to really amount to anything, because you just don't have an actual starting point towards a goal that you're intending to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that we've got someone who's listening and they're like, I've got the body fat sorted, I'm training 3 times a week, I'm doing all that stuff, I've got the core in place. Are there any things that you would recommend that in a typical household that they stop doing and that they start doing?
For sure, you should not be looking at your phone before an hour before you go to bed. I know 90% of people break that rule, but it disrupts disrupts your optic nerve. It disrupts all sorts of fields in your body. You should also, obviously, if you can, turn off your router. You should not have anything in your room. Your room should be blacked out. You should not be charging your phone next to you as you sleep with an alarm on your phone. So many of those people do that wrong. I'm just trying to think of like other stuff. Obviously, the cliche stuff is like everyone should have a morning ritual. Everyone should wake up in the morning and do some form of mindfulness, whether it's meditation, contemplation, grounding in nature. You should not wake up and look at your phone. I think everybody talks about those things now, but again, do people really do those? I've even found myself sometimes now, because I'm scaling a company, where I wake up in the morning and I like go into my practice and then I hear you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, it's game over, right? It's game over. It's still your choice to not have this around you so that you don't hear the vibration or the whatever it is, the notification going off, so that you can, get into your ritualistic practice. Like my wife is amazing at this. Every single morning, she's up at before 5:30. This morning she was up at 4:55 because one of her dogs woke up and was like wanting to go outside. But she's out there knocking out what she needs to do to connect with what I call, the divine mind, whatever you want to look, or whatever you look for your spiritual practices. But it's like she every day without fail, and she gets into that groove. And then when she does get into her technology and the stuff that she has to do from a business standpoint, she's not distracted.
You're right. And I think this has to be done pre-willpower, because
absolutely,
as soon as you wake up and you pick up this thing that's been engineered for addiction, and then you check one note, whatever, boom, like that's it. You're completely out. And I definitively find, me and Johnny, my business partner, have found this, that like, even if you try and then, even if you make a good recovery of the morning, let's say you do a bit of phone stuff and spent half an hour doing that, and then you try and do a good morning routine,
it's still,
despite that, your mood is still a couple of points down throughout the rest of the day.
So to your point, because I already told you, that happened to me this morning. So I was up, I was about get in the shower, do my ritual, because I shave pretty much my face and my neck and all that stuff on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which is my training days, my garage training, which is so productive now.
Nice.
And yeah, I literally went downstairs to get my book that I'm reading. It's like a meditation book that I had left. I usually have it in my nightstand, but I left it last night because it was a family outing and stuff. And so when I went downstairs, my business partner was messaging me. He's on the East Coast, so the time difference, because it was only like 6:50. And I picked it up and overwhelmed. And that 5 minutes literally was an hour. And so then I was like, fuck this. I'm going out in the backyard. I didn't take my shower. So I broke up my whole day. My whole day I've recovered now, but it's still, like you said, you do not get back that space. Like I call it now space. It's literally now space. It's my time. I'm going to get connected in the way I need to get connected. But you're absolutely right. Like you do not have the same entry and as I would call the momentum that will carry through the day when you are disrupted. No doubt.
It's the closest thing to a time machine, isn't it? Like, as you said, the 5 minutes, you look up and it's an hour later and you're like, what has happened here? So I
clouds.
suppose these are more kind of the psychological effects and the things that disrupt your day in that sense. You mentioned something else in passing just before about EMF and exposure to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and things. How important do you think they are?
Oh my God, dude, it's the most important thing. If I was not wearing these glasses in the course of my day, because I'm on very large screens doing a lot, like I'm definitely how do you call this? Like a high achiever. I do a lot. My eyes would burn out. My eyes are already bad. I had fighter pilot vision until I was 46 years old, 2010, and I could see amazingly. And dude, the screens have blown me up. I now have nearsightedness, which means I can't read afar. I have to wear glasses. If I want to go to a movie theater, I don't have to worry about that anymore. Like I can't read far and my sight just sucks. I mean, it's absolutely garbage. And I know it's now from all of this. You definitely have to wear Bluetooth or a blue light sensitivity and blocking glasses. I also have the really dark amber ones that I put on at night, 8:30. I'm usually doing cardio at night on my off days of training. So it'd be tomorrow and Thursday and sometimes Saturday night. And I'm wearing my ambers. I'm reading a book, wearing my ambers, preparing my eyes to go to sleep. I'll do cardio at 7:30 or whatever, and then I'll put those on and I'll do 30, 40 minutes, whatever I have time for. And then by 10 o'clock, I'm asleep.
So this is
And I
all in the
sleep like
interest
a
of
baby.
kind of wind down pre-bed, bedtime ritual. What about the effect of so that from what I can see, and the thing is like research on EMF, for me, I find it so obtuse and so hard to quantify and really get a picture of. But from what I can see, it seems like there is a disruption of monoamine transmission from Bluetooth and Wi-Fi exposure. What I
There
don't
is.
know is this in the doses that we're normally exposed to, and are things like AirPods, is it best to be cautious and to avoid them, or are they like, do you know what I mean? I don't
No,
know where we're at with this.
it's a really good question. I stopped wearing AirPods. I wear over the head Bluetooth, the muffs. I personally think that all of them are bad. I don't think there's enough data yet to really tell everyone like how bad things really are. But I stopped wearing AirPods, dude, because it damages my ears. Like not from a hearing standpoint, but just from the gunk, the buildup, the wax, all that shit that happens from wearing those things. I just stopped doing it. So for me, I just see the bigger picture, again, in my opinion, and I think that all of those things are causing some form of damage long term. We don't really ultimately know. There's still not enough data. And again, everything is suppressed. Anthony J works with a doctor that I work with, Dr. Keith Nichols, who works with another doctor, Dr. Scott Howe, and they're putting forth the testosterone resistance syndrome, which is essentially saying that because of the onslaught of the chemical cascade that we're all being annihilated by, that a lot of men have testosterone or androgen receptors that are just not sensitive to testosterone anymore. So those guys can go get their testosterone measured and it's like normal or middle range, and they still have no testosterone because their androgen receptors will not literally biologically cleave the testosterone as it should. And so they have no conversion to free testosterone. Those guys literally will tell you that things are bad in a lot of different ways. And the environment, again, all these different things that we do are causing it. And they'll tell you also that the EPA, which is again in the United States, which measures the contaminant levels of all these harmful byproducts in the system, are covering up everything. Again, they don't want to be liable. They don't want to have lawsuits. They both keep, and Dr. J will say that like, they're not even measuring the cross-linking. So what I mean? So it's the androgen receptor sensitivity is like nil, but what's actually happening with the androgen receptors mutate with the estrogen receptors and vice versa. So it's just, it's a mess, bro. It's like a biochemical mess. And ultimately, again, it comes down to what can you do that's not going to drive you completely insane in doing versus combining that with obviously living a very clean, lean, low inflammation life.
That's a good point. Like, what can we do that's not going to just be so straight? And I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but actually I mean it seriously. That stuff that if we're living a life that is trying to avoid things so much that we're developing OCD type tendencies and raising our cortisol, that's actually contrary to optimizing your hormones. And I think we're going to see this very much. I think through the other end of COVID, we're going to see people that have developed a real sense of germ phobia.
Oh yeah, it's already out there. They look at you weird when you're in public and you're not wearing a mask in the broad daylight. Dude, fear has overridden common sense. If you're walking around in a giant park or shopping center, outdoor, right, in your bright sunlight at 90 degrees, and you're wearing a mask, then it's, to me, like that's more harmful to your rate of breathing and respiration than someone who's not wearing a mask. And again, I don't care what people do or what they think. Most people have been engineered to the point where they don't know what to think. The masks don't work. The masks do work. We need masks for immunity. We don't need masks for immunity. It's all so insane at this point that I just say, again, use the common sense factor. When you wear a mask, that you labor to breathe in the mask. Of course you labor to breathe in the mask. Then if you're walking around in hot sun in broad daylight, then why are you wearing a mask? Again, that's fear. That's fear-based behavior. That's fear-driven behavior. If you're 90 years old and comorbid, then yeah, wear a mask. But if you're a normal average person in normal health, then stop restricting your rate of breathing because you think it might defend you against airborne pathogen / virus, whatever it is. That's
I see what you're saying there, that people should make their individual risk assessments. But I suppose part of the problem is that there has been inconsistent messaging from governments and so on. So people don't know.
That's purposeful, though. It's all purposeful. Just like they're bombarding us in the environment, they're confusing us with the messaging. It's the same thing with the news. It's what's fake, what's not fake, what do you believe? It's insanity. The only real answer is to opt out of it. Like just to not listen to it and go about creating in your life on a day-to-day basis and serving other people.
Yeah, and if that's possible, I think the difficulty with the mask thing is that if we're wearing masks not for our own protection but to protect others, then I think the choice comes about where it's like, if you're going to opt to be in a public place where there are vulnerable people, then it's your kind of moral responsibility to do what you can to protect them. But if not, then there's...
But see, I disagree with you, though. I disagree with you, though. You don't have a moral responsibility to protect anybody. You have a moral responsibility to protect yourself. You're not out there in the good of the... none of us as individuals, you already said it. You said it very well earlier in this podcast. The only thing that we can control is us and our reaction to what goes on around us. So it's not our responsibility to worry about other people. It's not. So ultimately, if you're in public and you're healthy, you should choose, and you do, obviously, in most free world countries. Some places you can't, probably, right, in China. But in the UK or in the United States, you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do without harming other people. And if other people look at you, again, I'm just saying it's broad sunlight. If you are comorbid or inflamed or susceptible, then you shouldn't be out in public anyway. Absolutely at risk. So if you're going to blame the other person who's out in public who's not at risk, then it's whose fault is that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I suppose it is a shared responsibility. I guess this is a philosophical point of at what point does the concern for someone else's health overcome an individual's right or sovereignty? But I suppose.
Right, but do you honestly believe, though, that wearing a mask is do you believe, based on what you know, that wearing a mask in public is going to protect that other person if they're comorbid or inflamed from a pathogen that can come in through the eyes or the ears? Again, I've done a lot of research on this. That's why I want people to understand that I am not for masks. I think the masks are a total scam. In fact, I've already conclusively proved that they are. I wrote a 11,000 page paper that's not published anywhere other than my blog, but it's had 1 million views. So I know a lot of people have seen it, and we looked at every single piece of research on the planet, and there is zero conclusive evidence that masks do anything. In fact, the CDC, when the CDC first came out, told everybody that masks do not offer any protection against this type of contaminant. So I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just saying that as a very well-researched person who does my homework, I want people to understand that if you think by wearing a mask you're protecting people in public, you're not. The article, you can read it. Trust me, it's very deep. I had 6 doctors help me write it. People are confused purposely. They have put a lot of information in the public, as you said, that confuses people, because you could find 100 people that will say that I'm full of shit. And 100 studies will be broken down and say, oh no, the masks do provide immunity. And if you're a compromised person in a public setting, you have to wear a mask. You absolutely can support what you're saying. I've just done a lot of research on this and a lot of work on this. And I know that laboring to breathe in public is not protecting another person who's comorbid or immune compromised. That person, if they are, should be in their house, not in public. It's that simple. There is no other way to look at it other than just the confusion that people think, because you are right from a Good Samaritan perspective, or from, like you said, a philosophical perspective, that to protect other people, you should wear a mask, but it's just not true. I mean, that it's the mask is not providing protection for people who are, what's the word I'm looking for, who are potentially able to get the virus. And again, we're all potentially able to get the virus. There's a lot of factors in it. There's genetics. Anthony Jay and I already did a webinar on this. We talked about ACE2. And if you have a high propensity of ACE2, receptor sensitivity in your body, it's very likely if you get this virus, you could die from it. So
there's a differential racial effect of
exactly
people having
absolutely. I mean, dude, at the end of the day, this thing was engineered. Nobody is admitting this yet. They will eventually. Just like the HNN1, all these viruses are built, right, to cause whatever. They're testing them in laboratories or whatever. Maybe they're bioweapons, maybe they're not. It doesn't matter. But like when they're designed to kill or designed to cause whatever. And so ultimately, when these guys design these things at whatever level they're designing them, they're designed to go after population groups, ethnicities, countries, all this stuff. Every time people continue to look at COVID, they get more and more freaked out. Like they find AIDS, SARS, they found Ebola. There's so many mutations of this disease. It's crazy.
It's a whole topic of itself. And I'm keen to have a look at the blog post that you've written.
Oh, I'm going to send it to you, dude. It's deep. It's 10,000 words.
Oh yeah. I'll give it a read.
I know you're researched and very well read. So that's why, if you weren't, I wouldn't care. But I know you'll find it valuable, because like most people just don't read today. They'll read the headline and they'll say, oh, you're full of shit. It's not my echo chamber.
Well, no, I think this is why a lot of the health bodies have been divided on mask guidance, because it's whether, as you said, like there's a possible mechanistic reason that it would work, and obviously its uses in surgery and so on, but then also it's possible that it's the behavioral change and the fact that wearing a mask gives people more of an awareness to maintain a distance, so
that's where it's good. And that's why some of the other Asian countries have done such a good job, but they've also been cultured in like being very protective of space and stuff like that for like literally decades, like in their culture. Whereas like in America, people are just like not conditioned in that way. So it's, and again, you too, like people are wearing bullshit. They're not wearing anything that's protective. I've seen people wearing panties and underwear. Again, dude, it becomes just ridiculous.
Yeah. So I saw someone who was just they just wore a pair of latex gloves all day. And it was like, and one of the other doctors had a word with them, because they were just like, this was a visitor to the hospital. And it was just like, what are you doing? Like, when was the last time you washed your hands? And the guy was like, oh, this morning. And he was like, so how is wearing gloves any better than what you're doing right now? You've washed your hands.
Dude, how many people are wearing masks that they don't wash? They're not being like properly decontaminated with like antibacterial soap and stuff like that. Like they just continually put it over. Then it sits in their car in the hot sun. The whole thing is just, like I said, it's like a whole topic that we kind of sidetracked here on. But I think it's valuable, but like it's crazy where it's gone. And again, in my opinion, I hope that we're at least somewhat closer to like developing herd immunity, because that's what's ultimately is whenever there's a pathogen or a virus or bioweapon or whatever, it takes going around the world once or twice for people to develop herd immunity.
Yeah, and I hope we are close to that. I suppose it's so difficult when it's so intermingled with a lot of the it's very politicized. There's a lot of, especially in America, where people value independence and freedom so much that it's really tied up in a lot of that, and I can see why there's a big resistance with it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Jay, was the living a fully optimized life is part of your slogan, but also raise your vibration. And for a guy that doesn't look or behave in a very kind of hippie way, this is something that, like, you're scientifically grounded, you're very evidence-based, and then you've got this other side to you, which is about the woo-woo level of your consciousness. And thing is, I'm all about the woo-woo, but I'm very keen to hear how that's come about.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I appreciate you asking me for that. It's my whole life now. If you look on my wall, all of this is from the Sacred Valley of Peru. And my wife and I, and then my sales director and his wife from my residential real estate company that we have here in Southern California, went to the Sacred Valley last July. And it just changed me, bro. Like my entire state of being was like uplifted, inspired. Literally, like, without sounding too woo, I essentially transcended. Now, before I explain deeper, like, I've always been a guy who's been walking what I would call the esoteric path. I've always been a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist type person. And I've been reading, as you said, voraciously books on mankind's search for meaning, ancestry, ancient philosophy, all of the literal ancient texts on why we're here. Like, I always think of like the Outcast rap group back in the late 90s or early 2000s. Like, there was a song in it. I forgot what the name of the song was, but I just remember Big Boy saying, "What the meaning of all this?" So that's literally like my mantra, right? Like, what the meaning of all this? So but the reality of going to Peru is, if anyone ever gets a chance to go there, the conscious energy of that place, that space, is so unbelievable that it altered me, or it brought me back to just a sense of the mission, which was like telling people how to optimize physically, hormonally, health optimization. More became of, we got to raise consciousness, right? Like, we got to manifest the golden age. So it's all the things that I do now, for the most part, is about raising consciousness. Like, I'm going to do a video for my YouTube channel right after this amazing podcast is over. And by the way, man, I really appreciate you having me on your podcast, because I think,
Oh man, it's been brilliant.
no, and like, we talked about stuff that you didn't think we were going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's when you get true beauty, because
I didn't think I would be having an argument about masks this time.
I don't think we really had an argument. I really think we just presented each other's information. You have your own stance, which I totally respect and agree with. And that's what we need to get to as a species, is we can all agree to disagree. And as so many people right now aren't doing it. But to the consciousness thing, I've been reading Dr. David Hawkins.
He is a big fan of David.
And another guy, which if you haven't read, I'm going to send you a giant Dropbox folder that's going to melt your brain after this, Walter Russell. Are you familiar with Walter Russell?
I'm not.
Dude, I fall over. So obviously you're very familiar with Hawkins. You understand the consciousness scale. So this, to me now, is the most important thing in humanity, which is, again, to get people, which from Hawkins is not being familiar with his work. 80 to 85% of people vibrate below the line of integrity. And for people that are watching this podcast and don't know what this is, he created a calibrated scale of consciousness from 1,000, 0 to 1,000, where 0 is these adjectives: apathy, guilt, shame, despair, blame, and humiliation, to 1,000, which is like avatar, spiritual being, right? Enlightenment, ineffable, pure consciousness, self, what is. So somewhere as a human being, a fallible human being, you want to get your vibration to where you're somewhere in this 450 to 500 range. And obviously as a human with an ego, living in a material realm, that you're going to have, imbalances. As I always say, you might have the most amazing meditation in the morning and then leave to go to work or wherever you're going, and somebody cuts you off in the road, and whoa. So it's obviously the master of human form consciously is able to keep his state of being somewhere between 400 and 500 on the regular. And even when they have that momentary lapse because somebody cuts them off or some egoic form happens, you can regain balance and bring yourself right back here. So it's like the master of beingness, or state of your state of being, can essentially move from any level, hopefully maintaining, some balance of right in here. But if they do drop to here for whatever reason, can go right back to here. And why have I moved my focus in my talk to this? Because like, I realized, especially being in Peru and seeing the indigenous people of Mesoamerica and working with some guides. And I didn't, by the way, do any plant medicine when I was there. I'm a big plant medicine believer. I've done a lot of plant medicine in my life.
That's what I was about to ask you, yeah.
Yeah, I've done 3 different sessions of MEO. I wrote an amazing article about the use of MEO, which I'll send to you too. It's very, very long, very in-depth. It's probably one of the top 5 or 6 articles maybe ever written about plant medicine, because I went about as deep as I could. And again, I'm a very advanced user of it. But it's more important right now to get enough people to hear, because once that happens, we will drop all of here, which is essentially like blame and what I call the victim vibration, which is very prevalent in the world right now with all the people that are protesting. It's so-and-so's fault, or I wasn't, because. So we can all take advantage, or not take advantage, but take accountability of who we are as beings.
Radical responsibility,
our actions, right? Our actions, our response, everything that we have. As I always say this, so I have 2 daughters. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I have a 10-year-old daughter. My 12-year-old daughter is extremely accountable, totally personal, liable, and responsible for everything. And my 10-year-old is a victim vibrator. Like everybody else's fault instantly goes into, it's not my fault. And I'm constantly with her. Yeah, I constantly am with her and educating her and telling her that. And my wife doesn't like this because she wants me to use a different word, but I'm always telling her it's her fault because I want her to know in her lingo at 10 years old, at fault or not fault. And so like I'm attempting to teach her. And I know that if she was a little bit older and I had a better use of the word, I could tell her personally accountable, or right. Or, you know,
It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the most empowering thing, actually, knowing that you are yeah. So for anyone that's listening and thought like, what is this handbrake turn that this podcast has taken? I thoroughly recommend going into David Hawkins and Lester Levinson if you really want to go full woo woo, because he bridges the gap. David Hawkins, he's a psychiatrist who bridges the gap between taking a quantified and empirical, I'm not going to say evidence-based, but empirical approach to consciousness, and all of these terms of raising your vibration and your state of awareness that seem very intangible and hard to get a grasp on. He really makes this into a process that is reliable and empirical, and you can actually just discover that for yourself.
Yeah, no, good point. Like the book though that they should read is Letting Go, right? That's the most easy to understand, because obviously his, Power versus Force, The Eye of the Eye, his other books are phenomenal works, like when you're ready for them. The average person watching this podcast is not ready for that type of work. But it's again, just to finalize and just maybe to end the show, we have to get enough people to vibrate. As you said, awareness is the best word for it. Consciousness, vibration, awareness, they're all interchangeable. But we have to get enough people at what I call a planetary level of consciousness of literally like divine loving respect. Right? Like where we all respect each other for whatever we are, whether we're fat, short, tall, black, white, Asian, Mexican, Hispanic, whatever. Like everybody has a mutual admiration and respect for everybody else, and there's no judgment. And and again, it's my opinion and my belief, but I believe that if enough of us are preaching this kind of information when we talk to people, that it just wears on you. Because, again, without going super, super woo-woo, at base essence, man, we're not these bodies, right? We're spirit. We're absolutely divine essence spirit. And anyone who challenges me to that statement, if you just do plant medicine 1 or 2 times and you do it without fear, you will feel your base essence. You will feel that spiritual soul essence, which is who you really are, inhabiting this physical body. Once you get to a point of knowing that you're not just this body, you know what I'm saying? And you're way more than that. You overcome the fear of like finite limitation, existence, especially death. And you're just free to live your life is at any level that you want. And that's like how I live my life now, is I don't fear anything. Every day is a gift. Every day I'm blessed. I'm humbly honored to be on your podcast today. I'm grateful for everything. I'm grateful for my dogs that I sit with in the backyard every day. So not to go too woo-woo on people, but you really do have to elevate your being to a state of permanent gratefulness or permanent gratitude. And again, just to end it with the Mesoamerican culture, especially down in South America or even in the like Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, they have a word that they use for this, which is called Ani. It's A-Y-N-I. And Ani means divine reciprocity. And when you have a divine reciprocity for everything, right? All conscious life is sentient and respectful, which they look at as everything is conscious, right? Like the birds, the rocks, the streams, the rivers, the wind, the trees, everything is conscious and everything is sentient. And so when you respect that, or you have that idea about all life and all living beings, you're not going to have judgment. And everybody's playing a role. And so you can have like what I call universal respect or universal awareness of everybody is here to play a role in your life. And if you look at it that way, you're not going to judge them. And I think too many of us judge people or judge things for things that we really don't need to, if we would just have that focus of Ani in our life.
There's too many very hardline CEO type people that follow this path, or that are subscribers to this reciprocity principle. And these are people who have very little time for woo-woo stuff. And I do start to wonder, actually, is it 70 or 80% of CEOs have a meditation practice? And you're thinking that there is a very practical and pragmatic benefit to this stuff. even if you're not going to subscribe to whatever the mechanism is, even if we just say it's the reticular activating system and it's your mirror neurons and it's the way that whatever the actual mechanism is, there is absolutely something spooky that happens when you start to adopt these principles.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's when you read the Walter Russell stuff, he talks about you can't really ultimately make it to the highest levels until you actually realize that abundance is everywhere. And so again, that whole reciprocity aspect of things, when you just see things without attachment, without ego, without judgment to them, everything is an opportunity, literally.
There we go. What a tone to end that podcast on. Jay, it's been a pleasure. How can we find out more about you?
Again, I'm honored and humbled to be here today. I really appreciate you having me here. Best way to get a hold of me probably like publicly is through Twitter, JC Campbell. I'm sorry, at Jay Campbell 333. I'm on Instagram, of course, too. I'm not there as much as I probably should be because I spend most of my social media time on Twitter, but I do have an agency that manages that account. And every now and then you got a hold of me. I was actually on vacation, which was perfect. But I'm also on Instagram, same thing. It's Jay Campbell 333. For all the people, though, that watch your show or watch this podcast, I always do this. You can go to jccampbell.com/free books, and you will get the TOT Bible, which is the Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible. And then, of course, my book on fasting, which is the Metabolic Blowtorch Diet. They're PDFs, but you will be able to download them for free. And then there's also like a bibliography of all my best podcasts, interviews, and stuff. So if you want to learn more about me or go deeper down the rabbit hole, you'll be able to get it at that link. So it's jccampbell.com/free books.
Cool. We will stick that in the show notes. And yeah, you are prolific with the content. So there is a lot of stuff for people to get their teeth into. Jay, thanks very much.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate you having me on the show today.